Narendra Modi's gentle words made Sundar Pichai emotional. The hall was filled with a quiet energy. Hundreds of people had gathered to listen to a conversation that promised to be unforgettable. There were business leaders, students, journalists, and ordinary citizens, all sitting with eager faces, waiting for something they could carry home in their hearts. The stage was set with 2 chairs, a simple table, and warm lighting that made the atmosphere feel calm and welcoming. Yet, behind this calmness, there was tension, because everyone wondered how the meeting between Narendra Modi and Sundar Pichai would unfold. At first glance, Sundar Pichai looked composed. He was the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, a man who had faced countless interviews and intense boardroom battles. But tonight was different. This was not a corporate event, not a product launch, not a meeting with investors. This was deeply personal, because the man beside him was none other than the Prime Minister of India. Narendra Modi had carried the hopes of millions and was known for his ability to connect with people's emotions. The thought of what would be said in this hall made Sundar's heart beat faster. As the lights dimmed and the audience grew silent, Modi turned toward Sundar with a gentle smile. It was not the smile of a leader addressing a CEO. It was the smile of an elder who saw the child inside the grown man, who remembered the stories of families who worked hard, who sacrificed, and who never gave up. For Sundar, that smile brought back a flood of memories. His small house in Chennai, his father's long hours at work, his mother's dedication, and the evenings when the family sat together with simple meals but endless love. The moderator asked the first question. It was directed at Modi. He spoke about India's progress, about technology, about young people creating change. But midway through, his tone softened. He looked at Sundar, paused for a moment, and then said words that no one in the hall expected. "Sundar, before I speak to you as the leader of my country, let me speak to you as a son of India. I see in your eyes the journey of every child who once held dreams bigger than their circumstances. I see in you the story of parents who gave everything so their child could fly." The hall went silent. Sundar's lips trembled slightly. The words struck deep because they were not about Google, not about Silicon Valley, not about global success. They were about his roots, about the silent sacrifices of his parents, especially his mother, who had always believed in him even when life seemed impossible. Sundar remembered the times when electricity failed, when his mother would hold a lantern so he could keep studying. He remembered how she smiled when he won his scholarship, even though she was hiding her tears of worry about the expenses. Conflict rose inside him. Should he stay composed like the CEO of a trillion-dollar company? Or should he allow his emotions as a son to rise to the surface? He felt the weight of millions of eyes on him. He felt the cameras capturing every expression, every flicker of his face. And yet in that moment, Sundar chose to be real. He chose to let the emotions come. With a soft voice, he replied, "Sir, your words remind me of my mother. I have sat in the biggest halls of the world, but today, when you spoke about sacrifice and roots, I felt like I was back in my small home, listening to her voice. She always told me, 'Never forget where you come from, because that is your true strength.' And today, I feel that truth again." The audience could feel the sincerity. Some wiped their eyes. Others held their breath. Here was one of the most powerful men in technology, admitting openly that his strength did not come from his title or his position, but from the love and lessons of his parents. Narendra Modi nodded gently. "This is why humility is the greatest strength," he said. "Because no matter how high you rise, when you remember the ones who built the steps for you, you never lose your balance." Those words settled in the hall like a soft prayer. Sundar looked down for a moment and his eyes glistened. He thought of his father, who had saved for years to buy a scooter so the family could travel together. He thought of his mother, who wore simple clothes so he could afford books. And now, sitting on a stage in front of the world, he realized something. Success is never a single person's story. It is the story of all the people who carried you when you could not walk alone. The suspense of the evening was only beginning. No one knew what emotional turns this conversation would take. But one thing was clear already. This was not a usual public event. This was the unfolding of a story that touched every listener, a story about respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. It was a story that showed that even the most powerful titles fade before the gentle power of human connection. And as the hall remained silent, waiting for what would come next, Sundar knew his life was about to change once again. The silence in the hall was heavy, yet it was not empty. It was filled with thoughts, with memories, with emotions that every person carried in their own way. People looked at Sundar with fresh eyes. They no longer saw only the CEO of Google. They saw a son, a man who had once been a boy sitting under dim lights, holding his mother's hand and dreaming of a bigger tomorrow. Narendra Modi leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but filled with weight. "Sundar," he said, "many people know your journey as a professional, but few truly know your journey as a son. Tell us, what gave you the courage to rise above the challenges you faced? What kept you going when the world did not see your potential?" The question pierced deep. Sundar took a breath. His mind traveled far back in time. He remembered the small streets of Chennai where he grew up, the smell of roadside food, the sound of vendors calling out, the crowded buses he took to school. He remembered the days when books were expensive, when he sometimes shared them with classmates, but never allowed himself to stop learning. With a soft yet steady tone, he answered, "Sir, I believe courage comes in small forms. When I was a boy, I did not think of becoming the CEO of a company. I only thought of finishing my homework before the lantern burned out. My parents taught me that even small steps taken with honesty lead you forward. And when you keep walking, one day you realize you have reached far more than you ever imagined." The audience leaned in, every word pulling them closer. Sundar's words were not rehearsed. They were raw, real, and personal. He continued, "I remember one day when my mother saw me upset. I had scored lower than I expected in a test. I told her maybe I was not good enough. She sat beside me and said, 'You are not defined by one result. You are defined by how many times you rise again.' That sentence stayed with me. Even today, when I face criticism or failure, I hear her voice telling me to rise." A ripple of emotion passed through the hall. Some nodded, recognizing their own mother's words in his. Others lowered their eyes, remembering sacrifices they had once overlooked. Narendra Modi listened carefully, his hands resting calmly on the table. When Sundar finished, Modi spoke again, his voice soft yet firm. "This is why I believe the strength of India is not only in its achievements, but in its families. Behind every scientist, every leader, every dreamer, there is often a mother or father who gave up their own comfort so their child could see a brighter future. We must never forget this truth." The hall erupted into gentle applause. It was not loud or forceful. It was respectful, like the sound of gratitude. But as the applause settled, another layer of conflict appeared. Sundar felt a deep tug in his heart. He thought about the countless young Indian students now living abroad, chasing dreams in foreign lands. He knew their struggles, the loneliness, the pressure, the fear of disappointing parents who had invested everything in them. He knew because he had lived that life. Sundar spoke with more intensity now. "Sir, there is one thing I want to share. When I first went to America, I was scared. I had never been on a plane before. Everything felt new, everything felt too big. And yet, every time I felt like giving up, I remembered my parents' faces. I remembered how they trusted me. That trust became my courage. I realized I was not only carrying my own dreams, but theirs as well." His voice shook slightly, and the audience felt his vulnerability. Here was a man standing at the top of the corporate world, admitting that fear and doubt had once followed him everywhere. Narendra Modi looked at Sundar with compassion. "Your story is not only yours," he said. "It belongs to every family who dreams for their children. It belongs to every young person who feels small but still dares to dream big. This is why I say, true leadership is not measured by power, but by the ability to inspire hope." The audience sat in stillness, absorbing the weight of his words. And then something unexpected happened. A young student in the crowd suddenly stood up. His hands were trembling as he held the microphone the staff passed to him. His voice was shaky, but his heart was full of courage. "Sir, I am from a small town too," he said, looking directly at Sundar. "Sometimes I feel lost, like I will never be able to make my parents proud. How do I keep going when everything feels impossible? The hall froze. It was as if the young man had spoken not only for himself, but for millions of students and dreamers who carried the same fear. Sundar's eyes softened. He took a deep breath and then spoke with the voice of someone who had walked that very road. My friend, the truth is you will feel lost many times. I have felt lost too, but every time you feel that way, remember this. Even a small step forward is progress. Do not measure yourself against others. Measure yourself against the child you once were. If that child could see you now, would he be proud that you kept going? That is enough. Tears welled in the young man's eyes. The hall broke into applause again, this time stronger, more emotional. The moment was no longer about a CEO and a prime minister. It was about every human being who had ever carried the weight of expectation, the fear of failure, and the hope of making their parents proud. Narendra Modi placed a gentle hand on Sundar's shoulder. This, he said softly, is the true meaning of leadership. Not in the power to command, but in the power to heal, to encourage, and to remind people that they are not alone. The hall felt transformed. What had begun as an official event was now a gathering of hearts. Strangers felt connected, united by shared experiences of struggle, sacrifice, and love. And yet, as deep as the emotions already ran, the night was only beginning. More truths were waiting to unfold, truths that would test not just Sundar's voice, but his strength to open his heart fully before the world. The air in the hall carried a weight that could not be described in ordinary words. It was the kind of weight that pressed on the heart, the kind that made silence louder than sound. The student's trembling question had opened a doorway, and Sundar's answer had stepped into every listener's soul. But what came next would dig even deeper. Narendra Modi glanced at the audience. His eyes moved slowly across the faces. Young students, parents, professionals, leaders, each of them holding stories of sacrifice and dreams. Then he turned again toward Sundar, and his voice took on a gentler tone, almost like that of a father speaking to his own son. Sundar, he began, you spoke of courage and trust, but I want to ask you something even more personal. What was the hardest moment in your journey? The moment where you truly felt you could not go on, but you still did. Because it is in such moments that our true character is revealed. The question struck like a lightning bolt. Sundar froze for a moment. His mind raced back through decades of memories, searching for the moment that defined him most. He thought of many nights of struggle, many fears, many failures. But one memory refused to let go. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes lowered, and his voice softened as he spoke. Sir, there was a time when I had just moved abroad for my studies. Everything was new, everything was overwhelming. I had very little money. I remember standing in a grocery store, calculating if I could afford both milk and bread. I felt small, invisible, and hopeless. I wondered if I had made a mistake leaving home. I felt like I was carrying a mountain that I could not climb. The audience listened with breathless attention. They could picture the young Sundar standing alone in a foreign land, surrounded by endless shelves of food but unable to buy more than the bare minimum. It was not the story of a CEO. It was the story of a boy trying to survive. He continued, his voice trembling slightly. That night I sat in my small room. I wanted to cry. I wanted to call my parents and tell them I could not do it. But then I remembered my mother's words. Every step forward, no matter how small, is still progress. So I decided not to quit. I promised myself that I would take one day at a time, and slowly, very slowly, those days turned into years, and those years brought me here. As Sundar finished, the hall was silent again. People were not just hearing his words. They were living them in their own memories, moments when they too had been on the edge of giving up, but somehow found the strength to take one more step. Narendra Modi's expression was calm, but his eyes showed deep respect. This is the lesson, he said softly. When we look at successful people, we often see only the final stage, the big titles, the respect, the achievements. But we forget the small battles, the quiet tears, the nights of doubt. It is those unseen struggles that make a person truly great. Sundar, by sharing this, you are not only showing humility, you are giving strength to everyone here. Applause filled the room again, but this time it carried a different tone. It was not only admiration, it was gratitude. People were thankful that a man at the top was willing to expose the weakness and pain that once defined him. It reminded them that no one is born unshakable. Strength is built in silence, piece by piece. As the applause faded, another voice came from the audience. It was an older man with silver hair and a tired yet proud expression. He stood up and spoke into the microphone. "My son is studying abroad right now," he said. "Every call with him begins with strength, but I know behind his words he is struggling. Listening to you today, Mr. Pichai, I realize I must remind him that even small steps matter. Thank you for giving me the right words to send to him." Tears shimmered in Sundar's eyes. He placed a hand on his chest and nodded respectfully to the man. "Sir," he replied gently, "your son is not alone. Every parent's love travels farther than any distance. Sometimes when I was lost, it was the memory of my parents' faith that brought me back. Never underestimate the power of a few words from a parent. They can change the path of a life." The man wiped his eyes, and many others in the audience quietly did the same. The atmosphere in the hall now felt like a living heartbeat, each story and response making it stronger. People were no longer strangers. They were connected by invisible threads of shared humanity, threads of love, struggle, sacrifice, and resilience. Narendra Modi let the moment breathe before speaking again. His voice carried both warmth and strength. "My friends," he said, looking at the audience, "this is why we must respect every dreamer. We must respect every parent who sacrifices quietly, because behind great success lies silent kindness. Kindness of parents, kindness of teachers, kindness of strangers who believed in us." Then he turned once more to Sundar. "You have reminded us today that humility is not weakness. It is power. And resilience is not just about facing the world. It is about remembering the gentle words that carried us when we could not walk alone." The audience rose in a standing ovation. But Sundar sat quietly, his eyes glistening. He felt a storm of emotions inside him. He knew this conversation was no longer just about him. It was about millions of voices unheard, millions of sacrifices unseen. He realized something important. Perhaps his duty was not only to lead a company, but to be a voice for those who could not stand on such a stage. And as he sat in that storm of emotion, one thought grew stronger. What would his mother say if she could see this moment? That question alone made his chest heavy with both pride and longing. The night was deepening, but the journey of truths, emotions, and revelations was far from over. The next words, the next exchanges, would strike even harder, pulling every listener further into the story of respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. The hall still echoed with the applause, yet the silence that followed felt even louder. People were not just clapping for what they heard. They were clapping for what they felt in their hearts. Sundar sat quietly, his eyes lowered, as if he was afraid to lift them and reveal the storm inside. Narendra Modi leaned slightly forward, his presence calm yet powerful. His voice carried a warmth that felt almost like a hand resting on Sundar's shoulder. "Sundar," he said softly, "you speak of your parents, their sacrifices, and the weight of their trust. But tell me, when you look back now, what do you wish you could say to them, not as the CEO of Google, but as their son?" The question cut through Sundar like a blade wrapped in tenderness. His throat tightened, and for a moment he could not speak. He saw images in his mind. His mother sitting late at night, mending old clothes so money could be saved. His father repairing broken appliances so he would not have to buy new ones. And he saw himself, a young boy with wide eyes, dreaming of places he had never seen. His voice trembled as he finally answered. "Sir, if I could speak to them in this moment, I would say thank you. I would tell my mother that every success I have is her victory. I would tell my father that every decision I make is guided by his strength. I would tell them that the world may know me for Google, but I know myself only because of them." His words shook something deep in the audience. Mothers and fathers sitting there felt tears rise uninvited. Children in the audience thought of their own parents' sacrifices. In that moment, the hall was no longer a stage with leaders and a CEO. It was a home, a place where love and sacrifice were spoken aloud without shame. Narendra Modi listened with eyes full of understanding. When Sundar finished, he spoke in a tone that carried both authority and gentleness. The measure of a man is not in the title he holds, but in the gratitude he carries. When a son remembers his parents with such humility, it is not only a personal story, it becomes the story of a nation. Because every parent who sacrifices for their child is part of that nation's strength. Applause rose again, but this time it was mixed with sniffles, with people wiping their eyes, with hearts laid bare. Then a surprising moment came. From the back rows, a middle-aged woman stood up. She was dressed simply, her hands trembling as she held the microphone. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Mr. Modi, Mr. Pichai, I am a mother. My son works abroad. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if he eats enough, if he is lonely, if he remembers me. Hearing this today gives me peace, because I realize now, even if he does not always say it, he carries me in his heart." The hall grew quiet again. Sundar's eyes filled with tears as he looked at her. He spoke gently, his voice almost breaking. "Madam, let me tell you something. No son ever forgets his mother. Even in the busiest days, even in the farthest corners of the world, her voice remains inside him. Your son may not say it every day, but I promise you, he carries you with him, just as I carry mine." The woman covered her face with her hand, overcome with emotion, and sat down as the hall applauded softly. Respectfully, Narendra Modi then turned to the audience. "This is the lesson for us all. Success is never a solo journey. It is a chain of love, sacrifice, and silent prayers. We must not only honor those who rise high, but also those who silently lifted them up." The weight of his words sank deep. People nodded, some whispered to each other, some simply sat still, holding back tears. Sundar, meanwhile, was fighting his own inner battle. On one hand, he was proud that his parents' sacrifices were being honored on such a stage. On the other hand, he was filled with regret that in chasing his dreams he had spent so many years far from them. He wished he could have been there more, held their hands more, given them the comfort they had given him. His voice cracked as he spoke again. "Sir, there is one truth I cannot hide. Success is beautiful, but it often comes with distance. My biggest regret is the time I lost with my parents while I was away building my career. I sometimes wonder if the price was too high." The hall was stunned by his honesty. Here was a man who had reached the heights of global success, admitting that even he had regrets, admitting that achievement did not erase longing. Narendra Modi's reply was gentle but firm. "Sundar, do not carry regret alone. Every parent who sends their child away to chase a dream knows they are giving away their time. They know the sacrifice, and they accept it because love is not selfish. Your parents would not want you to regret. They would want you to live fully, with humility, and to honor their gift." Sundar closed his eyes for a moment. Those words sank into him like healing rain. He realized something important, that perhaps the way to repay his parents was not with regret, but with the way he lived now, with the way he inspired others, with the way he carried their lessons forward. The hall felt this shift too. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted, not only from Sundar, but from everyone who carried regrets of their own. But the evening was not over. In fact, it was only deepening. Because what came next was not only about parents and children, it was about the soul of a nation, and how humility and resilience could shape its future. The hall had grown heavier with emotion, but at the same time it felt lighter too. It was as if Sundar's honesty and Modi's wisdom had allowed people to release something they had been holding inside for years: regrets, doubts, unspoken gratitude. People looked at one another with softer eyes, as though every face around them now carried a hidden story of sacrifice and resilience. Narendra Modi, sensing the change in the room, decided to take the conversation deeper. He leaned back for a moment, allowing silence to stretch before speaking again. "Sundar," he said calmly, "you spoke of sacrifice, of distance, of the pain that comes with chasing dreams. But tell me this. What gave you the strength to carry not just your own story, but the hopes of a billion people who now look to you as proof that dreams can come true?" The question hit Sundar with unexpected force. He had always thought of himself as an individual, a son, a professional, a leader. But in that moment, he was reminded of something larger, that his journey was no longer only his own. Millions of young Indians, scattered across villages, towns, and cities, now saw themselves in him. He represented what was possible when hard work met opportunity. His eyes grew moist as he replied, "Sir, I have asked myself this question many times. When I was younger, I thought I was walking alone. But now I realize I was never alone. Behind me was my family, my teachers, my community, and my country. Every time I doubted myself, I remembered where I came from. That gave me strength. And today, when I see young people in India working hard despite challenges, I draw my strength from them." The audience erupted in applause. Students in the front row looked at him with wide, determined eyes, as if his words had planted something new in their hearts, a sense that even their small struggles could lead to something bigger. Narendra Modi nodded, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "This is the lesson we must remember. Greatness is not built on selfishness. It is built on shared hope. When you carry your roots with you, when you remember those who walked before you, your success is not just your own. It becomes the success of everyone who believed in you." Then, something unexpected happened. A young girl from the audience, no more than 16, raised her hand. She was given a microphone, and her voice shook as she asked, "Sir, sometimes I feel like my dreams are too big for someone like me. I come from a small family, and people laugh when I talk about what I want to become. How do I keep believing in myself when no one else does?" The question struck the hall like a sharp arrow. Everyone looked at Sundar, waiting to see what he would say. His face softened as he remembered his own teenage years, when his dreams had seemed too large for his small world. He spoke slowly, carefully, each word carrying the weight of his lived truth. "My child, let me tell you this. When I was your age, people also thought my dreams were too big. They thought success belonged only to those who had wealth or power. But I learned that dreams do not belong to the powerful. They belong to the persistent. People may laugh at you, but remember, laughter fades. What lasts is the courage to keep walking, step by step, even when no one claps for you." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. She nodded, clutching the microphone tightly, as if his words had given her a shield against the doubts she carried. The hall clapped again, and many people whispered to each other, remembering their own teenage dreams, the ones they had abandoned too early. Some felt regret, but others felt a renewed spark, as though it was not too late to chase again. Narendra Modi's voice cut through the applause with quiet strength. "This is why humility matters," he said. "When leaders like Sundar share their struggles, they remind us that greatness is not unreachable. It is not reserved for a chosen few. It belongs to anyone who dares to believe, anyone who keeps walking even when the road is hard." He paused, then added, "And this is why kindness matters too. Because sometimes a single word of encouragement can keep someone from giving up. We must be careful with our words. A harsh word can kill a dream, but a gentle word can build a future." The hall grew still again. Sundar looked down, his mind heavy with thoughts. He realized that while he had spoken about his parents and his struggles, there was still a part of his story left untold, a part that carried both pain and strength. His voice broke the silence. "Sir, there is one memory I have never shared before in public. It was during my early days in America. I faced rejection after rejection. Interviews that ended with silence, doors that closed before they opened. There was a night when I sat alone and thought, maybe the world did not want me. But then, I remembered my mother's gentle voice telling me, 'You belong wherever your hard work takes you.' That night, I decided to keep going. And that decision changed everything." The audience sat frozen. Sundar's words carried the weight of every rejection they had ever felt. Every night they too had doubted themselves. His honesty became their mirror, and his resilience became their hope. Narendra Modi looked at him with pride. "Sundar, by sharing this, you have given every person here a gift. You have reminded us that rejection is not the end. It is often the beginning, and that even in the darkest night, the memory of gentle words can light the way." The hall burst into applause once more. But this time it was louder, more powerful, as if people were clapping not only for Sundar, but for themselves, for their own hidden strength, for the battles they had fought in silence. Yet as the clapping faded, There was a sense that something even deeper was about to come. Sundar had opened his heart, and Modi had guided the audience with wisdom. But the night was not finished. The most powerful truths were still waiting to be spoken, the truths that would leave every listener changed forever. The hall had already seen tears, silence, and applause, but now the atmosphere felt different. There was a stillness that carried both reverence and anticipation, as if everyone sensed the conversation was moving toward something even more profound. Sundar sat quietly, his hands resting on the table, his eyes lowered. Though he was surrounded by cameras and hundreds of people, he felt almost naked. He had spoken truths that he had hidden for years, and now he wondered if there was more he needed to reveal, not for himself, but for those who were listening. Narendra Modi leaned slightly closer, his presence calm but filled with gravity. His voice was softer than before, but it carried a sharpness that cut through the air. "Sundar," he said, "you have spoken about courage, about sacrifice, about rejection, but I want to ask you something different. When success finally came, when the world praised you, when people called you great, how did you stop yourself from losing humility?" The hall grew tense. It was a question that many wanted answered because success often changes people. It can create distance, pride, and arrogance. But Sundar had remained known for his gentleness, his calmness, his humility. How had he managed it? Sundar lifted his eyes slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes glistened as if he carried memories too heavy to hide. He spoke in a low, steady voice. "Sir, the truth is, success can blind you if you let it. There were moments when people around me treated me differently, not as Sundar the son, but as Sundar the CEO. I could feel the danger of believing in that image. But every time I looked at my parents, every time I remembered my childhood, I knew the truth. I was still the same boy from a small home in Chennai, eating dinner with my family by the light of a lantern. Nothing could erase that. Humility, for me, is not a choice. It is my identity." The hall erupted into applause, but Sundar did not smile. He simply lowered his gaze again as though the applause was not for him, but for the values his parents had planted in him. Narendra Modi nodded, his eyes filled with approval. "This is what the world must learn. True greatness is not in the height you reach, but in how firmly you keep your feet on the ground. When you rise without forgetting your roots, you inspire others to believe that they too can rise." The audience clapped again, but as the sound faded, Sundar felt another wave of conflict rising inside him. He thought about his life, the endless meetings, the sleepless nights, the decisions that affected millions. He thought about the pressure of being seen not just as a leader of a company, but as a symbol for his country. Sometimes the weight was unbearable. Sometimes the loneliness was sharper than success. He decided to speak that truth aloud. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "Sir, people often see the achievements, the titles, the recognition, but what they do not see is the loneliness that comes with it. There are days when I feel isolated, when I miss the simple comfort of sitting with my parents, when I long for the days before the world knew my name. I have learned that success is heavy, and if you do not carry it with humility, it will break you." The hall grew silent again, heavier than before. People looked at Sundar not with admiration, but with compassion. They realized that even those who seemed to have everything still carried invisible burdens. Narendra Modi responded gently. "Sundar, by speaking this truth, you have given the world another lesson, that success does not free us from struggle, it gives us a different kind of struggle. And humility is not only respect for others, it is also kindness to ourselves, a reminder that we are human before we are leaders." Tears glistened in the eyes of many in the audience. Some nodded slowly, understanding the hidden weight of their own silent battles. Then, unexpectedly, another voice came from the audience. It was a young man in his 20s, his voice unsteady but brave. "Mr. Pichai," he said, "I dream of becoming successful like you one day. But sometimes I am afraid that if I achieve it, I will lose myself. How do I make sure I stay true to who I am?" The question pierced the air like a sharp blade. Sundar looked at the young man with eyes full of empathy. He took a slow breath before answering. "My friend," he said softly, "the world will try to define you by titles, by numbers, by recognition. But you must remember, your true identity lies in the values you carry, not the titles you earn. When you rise, carry your parents' voices with you. Carry the lessons of your childhood. Carry the kindness of those who helped you. Those things will anchor you. Without them, success will make you hollow. With them, success will make you whole. The young man's eyes filled with tears, and he bowed his head slightly as if receiving not just an answer, but a blessing. The hall broke into applause again, but this time it was mixed with quiet sobs, with people realizing how easily they too could lose themselves in the race for recognition. Sundar's words reminded them that true success was not about becoming someone else. It was about remaining yourself, no matter how high you climbed. Narendra Modi looked at Sundar with deep respect. "You have given us many lessons tonight, Sundar," he said softly. "But the greatest is this: success without humility is failure in disguise. And humility without kindness is incomplete. Only when we carry both do we truly honor those who sacrificed for us." The audience rose in another standing ovation. The hall was filled with the sound of hands clapping, but also the sound of hearts beating together, united by the lessons of resilience, humility, and kindness. Sundar looked out at the sea of faces, his own heart heavy yet full. He realized this night was not about recognition, but about responsibility. Responsibility to carry forward the values he had been given. Responsibility to remind others that dreams are possible without arrogance, that success is meaningful only when shared. Yet, deep inside, he sensed that the night was not over. One more truth remained unspoken, one more emotional beat waiting to unfold, the one that would bring every thread of the evening together into a single, unforgettable moment. The hall was alive with clapping hands, but the sound felt almost distant, as if every heart in the room was waiting for something more. Sundar could feel it too. He knew that one last truth needed to be spoken, the kind of truth that would stay in people's hearts long after they left this hall. Narendra Modi sensed it as well. His gaze was steady, his expression calm, but his voice carried the weight of something final and profound. "Sundar," he said gently, "we have spoken of courage, of sacrifice, of humility. But let me ask you this one last question. When the lights are gone, when the titles fade, when the applause becomes silent, what do you believe will remain?" The hall fell completely still. The cameras, the lights, the faces, all of it faded from Sundar's awareness. He was no longer speaking as the CEO of Google, not even as a global leader. He was speaking simply as a son, as a man, as a human being. His voice shook as he answered, "Sir, I believe what will remain are the gentle words. The gentle words of my mother, who told me never to forget my roots. The gentle words of my father, who told me to stand firm in honesty. The gentle words of teachers, friends, and strangers who encouraged me when I felt small. In the end, it is not the achievements people will remember. It is how we made them feel. It is the kindness we gave, the humility we carried, and the hope we left behind." His words echoed like a quiet prayer. Many in the audience lowered their heads, tears slipping down unnoticed. Parents thought of the words they had given their children. Children thought of the words they had received and sometimes ignored. Everyone thought of the power of gentle words that had once lifted them in their darkest hours. Narendra Modi leaned closer, his eyes reflecting both strength and softness. "This is why I chose to speak to you not as a prime minister to a CEO, but as one son of India to another. Titles will fade, but respect and kindness will outlive us all. Sundar, your story is not only your family's pride, it is your country's pride. And tonight, you have reminded the world that the strongest power is not wealth, not fame, not technology. It is humility, guided by love." The hall erupted in a standing ovation, but this time it was different. People were not just applauding Sundar or Modi. They were applauding the values that had been spoken aloud, the lessons that had touched their souls. The clapping was not just noise. It was gratitude. It was recognition. It was a promise to carry these lessons into their own lives. Sundar stood slowly, his chest heavy with emotion. He placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly to the audience. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "I came here tonight as a CEO, but I leave here reminded of who I truly am: a son, a student, and a dreamer who was carried forward by gentle words and silent sacrifices. If my story means anything, let it mean this. Never underestimate the power of respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. They can change not only your life, but the world. Applause thundered again, echoing off the walls of the hall, spilling into every corner, carrying with it the energy of hearts transformed. And yet, in the midst of the applause, there was a moment of silence inside Sundar. He closed his eyes, and for the briefest second, he felt his mother's presence, as if she were sitting beside him, smiling softly, whispering once again the words that had carried him through his life. Never forget where you come from, because that is your true strength. He opened his eyes with a tear sliding down his cheek. But this time it was not a tear of regret. It was a tear of peace. He knew he had honored her, and in doing so, he had honored every parent, every child, every dreamer who had ever fought quietly against impossible odds. The event ended, but the story did not. People walked out of the hall with eyes shining, carrying pieces of what they had heard into their own lives. Strangers smiled at each other, parents held their children's hands more tightly, and young students whispered to themselves, "If he could do it, so can I." That night, in a hall filled with both silence and applause, Narendra Modi's gentle words made Sundar Pichai emotional, but they also gave birth to something larger. They planted seeds of resilience, humility, and kindness in every heart present, seeds that would grow and inspire far beyond those walls. And in the quiet of his own heart, Sundar knew one thing for certain. Achievements would fade, but the echo of gentle words would last forever.